Exceptional service begins with people, people who feel empowered, valued, and confident. Unlock your team's potential by bringing learning and operations together in one place, centralizing everything team members need in a platform built for how your people work, here, and even here. From training to operations to compliance, deliver resources at the time of need, giving your team the power to push your organization forward and operate without constraints. Create a future of unlimited potential with Wisetail, empowering teams and driving success anytime, anywhere.
Welcome to the Business of Learning, the Learning Leaders podcast from Training Industry, where we speak with industry experts and thought leaders on all things learning and development.
Hi, welcome back to the Business of Learning. I'm Michelle Eggleston-Schwartz, Editor-in-Chief here at Training Industry.
And I'm Sarah Gallo, Senior Editor. Effective onboarding isn't about checking boxes. And in 2025, it's really about creating those meaningful, human-centered experiences that set employees up for success. With today's employees largely valuing belonging, well-being, and purpose, the onboarding process has become really a critical moment to show employees that they matter. So today we're speaking with Geoffrey Roche, Director of Workforce Development at Siemens Healthineers, to explore the do's and don'ts of onboarding in 2025. Geoffrey, thanks for speaking with us today.
So glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you for joining us today, Geoffrey. To kind of get things started today, how would you describe the current state of employee onboarding in 2025?
Based on what I see and all the conversations I have, it's still quite fragmented. I think there's been a lot of intentional work done, at least in the healthcare space that I know so closely, to make it a better experience. But I don't truly get the sense that we've made it the onboarding experience as friendly and really as authentic as it needs to be. I still think it in many ways, to me, it almost seems like it's so much like a machine. We just do it, get it done, and then we move on to the next thing. And when I think about it, it's not dissimilar, honestly, from the recruiting process either. When we think about, we go through interviews, and I think oftentimes we've created the onboarding through that same lens, rather than actually think about it through an experience. I just had the privilege of spending several days with some great friends, and one of the friends that I stayed with is a big proponent of experience. So much so that even when you visit and stay in his home, he always is thinking about like these unique experiences that make you feel special. I often feel that that's how onboarding should be. I can't say, though, in my career that I've ever had any onboarding experience that was special. And I'm fearful in all the conversations that I have that that's very common.
Definitely. I love that idea of sort of making it into this experience, because it really is an opportunity when you think about it from the beginning. Kind of now that we have that understanding of where we're at, so to speak, can you share more on why it's important to intentionally embed belonging, mattering, and also well-being into the onboarding experience? And how can that sort of impact retention and engagement long term?
Sure. I think, look, I mean, if we look at it from the vantage point of if somebody goes through onboarding and during their onboarding experience, they get this genuine sense that they matter, that they belong there, that they'll feel seen, heard, acknowledged, valued, I think it's going to go a long way of helping that individual feel that this is the place for them. Now, I will say, I don't think it's going to go all the way because obviously, onboarding is one important part of your journey. If you onboard and it goes well, but then you have different elements that maybe you don't feel like you matter or don't feel a sense of belonging, then obviously that's going to change. But I do believe that if you do offer as a leader and as leaders an onboarding experience where people feel a strong sense of belonging and that they matter, and you even think about embedding mentorship early in that process, there's a greater sense that we're going to retain individuals. So that's what I would share from that vantage point.
I'd love to share some kind of real world examples for this, kind of turning the onboarding program into more of an experience, like you said. Can you share some examples of learning initiatives or maybe some onboarding strategies that can help increase belonging for new
Yeah,
hires?
absolutely. I think uh, I've had the privilege, obviously, of being on board, in different places in my career. And one experience that was really, somewhat unique and somewhat neat as well was, you know, particularly in healthcare, when we think about interdisciplinary teams, it can be a really neat experience when you're actually onboarded with not just the same professionals that you're actually gonna be always working with. And what I mean by that is some of the experiences I've had when you on board with a clinical colleague or clinical colleagues and you're non-clinical, it's really great when you hear their experiences, their journeys. And what I'm getting at there is that I believe that onboarding should be a time where, yes, we learn the company, but it also should be a time where the company learns us. Yes, that happens in the interview process, but now we're employed. Now we're there. And so I believe what I've seen some really cool experiences is when we actually focus on telling our story and listening to our story. I'll give you an example that I have not necessarily seen done in onboarding, but I think it could work extremely well in onboarding. I was recently in a space where I didn't know many people, and it was an organized but yet what I'll call organized yet still fluid type of social dinner. And the host basically gave us little cards. We were in groups of four. Again, we didn't know anyone, frankly, in our groups, but we had little groups of four, and we had little cards that would have a statement or one word on there that all of us had to read and then reflect, pause, and then answer. And as I was sitting there and thinking about it, it would be a really cool way of doing onboarding because ultimately, some of the people that you onboard with could become your closest colleagues, even if you're not working in the same area. And if you can get to know them genuinely, when you run into those tough times at work, which we all do at some point in time in our career, if you know more about that individual, it can be a fascinating experience. And, that one dinner led to so many different conversations that I'm now having with four of those people. And the most powerful thing about at the end of the night that the host had us do was to go back and in little jars put things that we remembered that they shared. And then each of us got to take that jar home. And, we now have that as a keepsake for the rest of our lives. Imagine in an onboarding situation where you have that. That I think is going to truly get at a sense of belonging and also a particular aspect around mattering.
I love that idea of sort of creating these prompts for connection sort of across the org. Seems really kind of beneficial too. I do want to make sure we touch on the leader's role here in onboarding. What role do leaders play in sort of creating that welcoming and inclusive onboarding experience?
I think leaders, without question, play a pivotal role. And I think far too often in organizational leadership, particularly in larger organizations, we see onboarding sort of, just said, stated from a leader, up, that's leadership development or that's organizational development's responsibility. And until they move over back to us, that's their responsibility. The reality of it is everyone's responsibility. And where I've often felt things are done in such a disconnected manner, and I've had this personal experience as well, where onboarding actually was very, very well done, but then the handoff to the leader was so poorly done that I didn't have a divisional type of onboarding. And I believe strongly that, at least in my healthcare experience, you've got to have both be done well. There has to be some really synergistic patterns that are clearly developed and constructed in the onboarding experience so that they're going to get onboarded by whomever is going to do that larger onboarding. But then when they're transitioned over, they've got to have that same level. I think far too often leaders miss the boat when it comes to these issues. And frankly, all the work that's gone on to recruit a top candidate literally we could lose them in those situations. I know it's been my experience where, I can remember sitting back and thinking, oh my gosh, why did I even make this mistake of coming here? Because clearly this leader, was what I call a fake it, make it moment in the interview process. But as soon as I really got to experience, that leader operates like a machine. That leader doesn't have personality. That leader doesn't have human interaction and want to even have that. I think that's why we have to have leaders that not only care about people, but want to be a part of a full onboarding experience. And the word I would use is that leaders have to want to create community. And if the onboarding experience creates community, then you better have leaders that also want to follow through on that community. Because once that village or that community suffers, we're done at that point.
It's such good points because those early days, the first 90 days, the candidate is really assessing, is this the right place for me? Do I belong here? Did I make the right choice? And so having that sense of community early and forming those relationships is so important. And the leader's role there is tremendous.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other point that I'll add here about that to your reflection there is that I think far too often many leaders will delegate aspects of this to another team member. But the risk you have with that is, I know in my personal experience, this is what happened for me, is it was delegated to a team member that I had no connection with. And so how I interpreted it was, you really don't care about me. So you just handed me off to this other individual who cares even less about me. And so now this experience at this point is like, whatever. So then I actually went and found my own way. I found other colleagues who helped to frankly onboard me. But I'm at a different level. So, okay, maybe that worked for me, but that's not how it works for everybody. And I still didn't feel good about it, but it's what I had to do because at some point you just have to do what you have to do. But I think to your point, there has to be genuine accountability on this. And frankly, I know in my hospital administration days, our organizational development team ran trainings for leaders when it came to onboarding. I've had to go through it many times in my leadership experience. And I'm always thankful that our team did that because what I could tell was there was this genuine desire to connect onboarding to the overall employee experience. And I can remember our CEO saying that at the end of the day, if onboarding is good or great, and the handoff to the leader is good or great, imagine how that individual is going to treat our patients. Because at the end of the day, it's all about our customers or those that we are here to serve. And she would always say, that's going to be what we have to remember because we know employee culture, organizational culture definitely impacts our customers and in our case, our patients.
The Certified Professional in Training Management Credential, or CPTM, is designed to convey the essential competencies you need to manage a training organization. When you become a CPTM, you gain access to alumni resources like monthly peer roundtables and a full registration to the Training Industry Conference and Expo. If you start today, you could earn the CPTM credential in as little as 2 months. To learn more, visit www.trainingindustry.com/CPTM.
I'd love to touch on the measurement aspect of onboarding. Can you share a little bit about how organizations can go about measuring the effectiveness of their onboarding programs and what should they do with those results?
Yeah. This is where it gets really interesting, right? Because ultimately to get the most effective results, you're generally going to have to also ensure that there's some level of psychological safety within that space. And sometimes a newer employee may be a little hesitant to give as much feedback on the experience, just depending on, where they came from. Because if they came from a culture where they were demoralized or beaten down or not treated with respect or didn't have a sense of mattering or belonging, it may be difficult. However, there are definitely certainly ways to do it through surveys. But again, they may not answer that depending on their experience because, look, I think those of us that have been around know even anonymous surveys don't always come across as truly anonymous. I could share some experiences of my own with employee engagement, and it's been interesting. But I do think where I have seen this done very well is some level of both the organizational development team and the leader asking their team members, what was the experience like? And whether that's done in written form or done in verbal form, I think it's certainly important. And it can also help us tweak it. Now, in my organization at Siemens, for example, when I was onboarded, we had a survey. And now in our case, we had a large onboarding, which is part of all of our customer service. And then we actually had a smaller onboarding. When I say smaller, because it was part of our educational workforce solution space. And we had a survey for both. Now, I didn't particularly worry about answering it because I looked at it from the vantage point. The questions were basically more around what was my experience like? Were there things that I would propose changing? There wasn't anything on there that made me fearful. But again, some people could. But that was some of the things. And then generally what I have seen is, team members will really utilize that to certainly make it better. I've seen things like some people comment on, they feel like there was almost too many sessions, less opportunities for networking. And I think that this is a really, really important part because when we talked about it at the beginning, we talked about mattering and belonging. It is sometimes in those situations where we get to network with our other folks that are onboarding that we actually find our true sense of belonging. And so we need to use that feedback, create the space for that feedback. I would actually argue that if it's a well-facilitated onboarding, you're actually going to get that feedback during the actual experience. Because if you're a good facilitator, you're gonna have enough emotional intelligence to read the room, but also have the sense to say, "Hey, how's everyone feeling right now? Is this going really well for you? Are you excited? Are you pumped?" I think those are the types of things we should also be thinking about. I regularly say if we wait until after, we've already missed the opportunity.
Definitely. I'd love if we could dig into some sort of actionable advice here, because I know sort of creating these human-centered experiences can be challenging. Do you have any advice for our listeners who are looking to make onboarding more inclusive and human-centered in 2025 and into the future?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly important, back to that early point that I highlighted, that when we do these onboarding experiences, we need to really ensure that we've created this space so that individuals feel psychologically safe. And I think that has to be the foundation. We're at a time where a lot of people don't feel heard, seen, recognized, valued by government, by employers, by their families, by their neighbors, by their community, and so much more. And we also know the data right now, right? I mean, from an organizational culture standpoint, we're probably at the most challenging time when it comes to retention. And also when it comes to individuals feeling like they belong somewhere, in particularly the workplace. And so for anyone that is engaged or involved, which frankly should be every leader and certainly anyone that's involved in the organization of this, the first thing you could do is truly to create that space. And that starts with even, instead of, and again, I know it can depend on the size of the organization, but instead of having everything be automated, think about picking up the phone or sending a message to say, "Hey, we're so excited, for you to be here. Onboarding is this time. If you have any questions in advance, let's connect because we want to make sure you have the best experience possible." We really need to take that extra step to make sure people, not that they feel special, but that they truly feel like it's actually going to be a really positive experience. And then we got to follow through on it, obviously, as well. I think what's important, though, is once we've created that foundation, we need to have, and I'm not suggesting a ton of icebreakers, because I know not everyone likes icebreakers, but we need to have appropriate ways of learning about one another and allowing individuals to share what makes them special. Because when that happens, the connection that occurs is so powerful. And everyone needs to have a peer. Everyone needs to have a colleague that they can connect with, that can be their listening sounding board when things get tough, that can be their accountability partner at times as well. And I think making sure we have the space for that is super important. The other piece I would suggest is don't make the onboarding just so regimented. Allow some flexibility within the schedule so that if individuals, want to connect further with other colleagues within the onboarding, that they have that opportunity. Yes, we are there to get a job done, but if we always want to have things be so machine oriented and so systematic, we're going to lose the joy in the workplace. And I think all of us know that from onboarding to the overall work, we've got to find what that joy in the workplace is, or we will not retain people. And then the final point I would make is, I would argue that however it's structured, we've got to allow the new team members to feel like they had just as much of their voice in the process as much as they were listening. And what I mean by that is, don't talk at them. Find ways to truly make it engaging. Don't just show a PowerPoint of company values. This is what we do in the workplace. I mean, come on, how many onboardings we've been through? That's just absolutely boring. And you walk away and feel like you're back in K through 12 school and your teacher's just teaching you. We need to make it engaging. Show some videos. Engage them. Ask them what the workplace should be like. Get their feedback early. You never know what may be shared that ultimately could lead to a powerful moment for the entire organization. I remember in my former healthcare system, every employee that onboarded when we started, and I was there a decade, and then got the privilege of being a leader, so I got to also participate in onboarding. Because at our healthcare system, you as a leader had to actually participate within the handoff. When they finished onboarding, you had to be there for the last several hours so that you would actually be there and see it. And then actually they would hand them off to you, and then you would take them on to do the rest of the onboarding experience. But one of the things that was powerful was every employee was always asked, why did you come into healthcare? What brought you into healthcare? And it was always powerful to hear those answers. But what came from those answers was this certain level of how do we really work together in an interdisciplinary nature, because everyone was coming at it in a different way. So it was very powerful. And we need to be always thinking about allowing individuals to share those human-centered examples, because it's what brings us into community.
I love that, like unlocking everyone's why, like, why are you here, your purpose, and because that is so powerful. Like, it's a powerful motivator about their work and how they're going to show up every day, and for a leader to understand what motivates them. I mean, that is extremely powerful. So before we wrap up today, what's one step our listeners can take to begin improving their onboarding process after listening to this episode?
Yeah, I think, obviously depending on the role of the listener, certainly if you're in the C-suite, my advice to you is, first of all, see learning and development as a trusted learning advisor. And if they tell you that, onboarding and all of this needs to change, don't ask them why. Allow them to explore and show you what it can be like. Allow them, to find those moments to demonstrate that this is not just a robotic onboarding work experience, but rather this can be fun, it can be engaging, and all that, it could be a life-changing moment if we do it correctly. And we all know people desire community, so let's think about that. For others that are in various L&D roles, training roles, leaders, etc., I would be thinking about how it is and what it is to our conversation here that you always allow individuals to share their why, their purpose. And how does that connect to your purpose? How does that connect to your organization's mission? And how does it overall create that community? Every one of us every day should be asking, what are we doing to ensure every member of our team matters? And what are we doing for them to have a true, authentic sense of belonging? That can start with onboarding, but then it has to follow through. And so I think every leader has to walk away and know that is their responsibility. And ultimately, the executive team has just as much responsibility to follow through on that. And ultimately, the board and shareholders do as well. Because the reality of it is that fiduciary responsibility is also people. And if there's one thing we should be really remembering right now, people are our best asset. They are our best resource. They are the DNA of our organizations. And we need to lift them up and show them that they matter.
I love that. What a good note to end on here. So with that, thank you again for speaking with us on the podcast, Geoffrey. I know I got a lot out of our conversation, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. How can they reach out if they'd like to get in touch?
Yeah, happy to connect anytime on LinkedIn, and happy to also talk through these issues anytime. This is the benefit is when we also learn together and really think about how we practice it together as well.
For more resources on this topic, check out the episode description or visit the show notes on our website at trainingindustry.com/podcast. And don't forget to rate and review us wherever you tune in to the business of learning. Until next time.